Before we begin, I just want to preface everything by saying that this episode is pretty lengthy, so I've decided to split it into two separate parts. The second part is also up right now on the channel, so you can check it out right after this one. Hello everybody, my name is Cole, and welcome back once again to another episode of How to Design Levels for Video Games. In the previous episode, we did an overview of 12 different design principles that can be used to make excellent levels for your games. And in this episode, we're going to expand on the topic of the concepting stage of level design, which we talked about briefly back in episode 2. We'll take a big look at all of the different things that you can do to create a perfect level concept. Let's get started. If you've ever worked on a game before, chances are you've heard of a game design document, or GDD for short. For those who've never heard of a GDD before, they're a highly comprehensive document that organizes all of the combined ideas and efforts of everyone on a game dev team into one place. Over the course of development, the document is constantly expanded and revised upon. They're generally seen as industry standard, so it's necessary to become familiar with them. However, some teams like to create separate documents for specific aspects of the development process, including level design. In this case, you would create a document called a level design document, or LDD. These keep all of your ideas, concepts, diagrams, maps, and a general look at the iterative process for each of the levels you create for a game together into one document. No matter which type of document you need to create, it's likely going to be a requirement for every project that you work on. When you're organizing all of your ideas into a document, make sure that it's clear and easy to follow. Remember that you need to be able to pitch your concept to the rest of your team. Take lots of screenshots of the progress you make with your levels so that you can document your work. I myself have created a very in-depth level design document for my Super Dungeon Maker level, which I'll be covering over the course of this series. The first thing you're going to do for your level concept is going to involve determining your limitations. These are general guidelines that you need to follow for designing your level, and typically they're decided by other people on your team, but this mainly depends on how large your team actually is. A few examples of limitations you might face during level design include: what is the game's genre? Knowing this is important because it helps you to narrow down what approach to level design you should try and employ. If you're working on an action game, you would want to prioritize combat, or if you're making an adventure game, you'd want to focus on exploration. What is the platform that the game is being developed for? This determines how large and how detailed the level can be. A higher-end platform could handle highly complex levels, while a smaller mobile title would likely be constrained and would require simpler levels. Is the game trying to show off new technology? For example, is your team trying to display fancy new lighting technology? Or maybe you're trying to show off some really cool new graphics or advanced particle systems. In any case, make sure you consider how you can design your level to showcase these features. What is the target audience? This can help you determine how difficult you want your level to be. Lower difficulty would naturally appeal to more casual audiences, while higher difficulty would appeal to core gamers. What sort of aesthetic will the level have? This is decided by the art director on your team. They would tell you what the requirements for the level would be aesthetically, so you can envision how your level would fit the requirement while you're designing it. What will the story of the level be? This is decided by the narrative director. You need to be aware of how the narrative of the game will be presented in your level, and how you can smoothly incorporate story beats into it. What is the context for the level within the game's progression? For example, if this is the first level of the game, design it as a simple tutorial or introduction. Or if it's near the middle of the game, you should try and make it more complex and less handholdy. Does the level need to introduce any new gameplay concepts? This is usually decided by the lead game designer. By knowing what sort of gameplay mechanics the level would introduce to the player beforehand, you can try to narrow down how you would design the level around that mechanic. What's the time frame that you have to create the level? It's very important to know this before you start so you can quickly figure out how to scope out your level and distribute your work across that time frame. Of course, these are just a couple examples. Your team will present you with as many limitations to follow as the level requires. In regards to my Super Dungeon Maker level, technically I don't really have any limitations that I need to follow for designing it. However, for the sake of this video, I'll pretend that I have some hypothetical limitations that my team has presented to me. The genre of the game is action-adventure, so it should be focused around exploration. The game is being designed for a core audience. As such, I should prioritize designing the level to challenge the player. The dungeon needs to teach the 12 principles of level design. Each principle should be carefully incorporated into its design. The dungeon takes place near the middle of the game, so it should be more complex in nature. The dungeon should be of average length. It needs to have 32 rooms. It needs to take place in an old underground tomb. It should try to achieve a foreboding, ominous atmosphere. New mechanics must be gradually introduced throughout the dungeon. It needs to feature a degree of non-linearity, with plenty of branching paths. It needs to have both a mid-boss and a final boss at the very end. Now that you know your limitations, you can next start to lay out the goals for your level. Unlike your limitations, your goals are entirely decided by you, the level designer. These are all of the things that you personally want to try and incorporate into your level. Keep in mind that these will still need to be approved by the rest of your team, however. A few different examples of goals would include: what is the primary theme of the level? Do you want the level to be centered around platforming, puzzles, combat, exploration? These can help you to narrow down the different gameplay elements you want to feature in your level. What sort of feeling do you wish for the level to instill in the player? Do you want it to make them feel joy, accomplishment, fear, surprise, awe? Do you want the level to emphasize tension and drama, or action and excitement? Knowing this can help you figure out how you can design your level to accomplish this. What sort of flow do you wish for your level to have? Do you want it to be linear, non-linear, a hybrid of the two? Do you want it to be fast-paced or slow-paced? Do you want your level to be vertical or horizontal in nature? Here's what I decided on for the goals of designing my dungeon. The theme of the dungeon should be focused mainly on puzzles and exploration, though combat should be featured as well. The dungeon should aim to make the player feel accomplishment as they gradually overcome its many challenges and navigate its labyrinthine design. It should have branching paths that lead to different ends of the dungeon. The dungeon's flow should be focused on twisting paths, but with an emphasis on quick movement and action. It needs to involve backtracking. It should have multiple floors, but primarily be very horizontal in design. Most of the dungeon will take place on one floor. So, now that you have all of your limitations and goals figured out, now it's time to start thinking about different ideas for your level. There are two ways for you to generate ideas. You could have spontaneous ideas, which would just pop into your head at any moment, or deliberate ideas, which involve sitting down and really thinking in order to figure them out. Personally, I find deliberate ideas much more reliable. I'd recommend sitting down and spending some time brainstorming a bunch of ideas for your level. There's really nothing that's guaranteed to help you out more than doing this. When I was designing my Super Dungeon Maker level, I sat down and spent several hours just writing down a bunch of ideas, really just anything that popped into my head. Obviously, the majority of these ideas went unused, but the time spent was still very valuable because it gave me so many options to choose from, and it made it much easier to decide on everything else that we're going to talk about later in this episode. Starting with... the next thing you're going to want to do is decide on some mechanics that you want to use throughout your level. The mechanics will be created by the game designer on your team, and they include many elements, such as items, obstacles, enemies, and various other things. For every level that you make, you'd need to look at all of the mechanics that are being designed for the game and decide which ones would be required. Figuring out all of the mechanics you want to use for a level is not something that needs to be set in stone this early on, but trying to narrow down what elements you want it to include can go a long way in easing the process of creating a level concept. For the most part though, this is all stuff that will be decided on fully during later stages of design. What's mainly important right now is to try and think about appropriate mechanics that will work within the context of the level. Consider the components that you want to use for your level with utmost care. It's very easy to tell when a level has just been cobbled together without any real thought. Make sure that everything fits the theme and visual aesthetic of the level, and makes sense within its context. For my dungeon, I looked at all of the different mechanics available within Super Dungeon Maker, and settled on these. For the items, I decided to include the shield, which allows players to block enemy attacks, the bombs, which allows the player to blow up cracked walls, the flippers, which allow players to swim through water, the hookshot, which allows players to cross bottomless pits, and this item would be dropped by the dungeon's mid-boss, keys, which are used to unlock doors, the boss key, which is used to unlock the boss room, the dungeon map, which reveals the entire dungeon layout, the dungeon compass, which reveals all of the treasure locations on the map, and hearts, which restore the player's health. All of these items would be found in either chests or pots that are scattered around the dungeon. For the obstacles, I decided on locked doors, the portcullis, which are doors that stay closed until a certain condition is met, breakable walls and blocks, movable blocks, sliding blocks, locked blocks, the rising bollards, switch crystals, boss doors, bottomless pits, blade traps, spike traps, snake turrets, fire bars, spikes, broken floors, water, step triggers, standing triggers, and hit triggers, bird statues, stairs, braziers, which are also grappling targets, wind-up triggers, invisible triggers, which activate once the player enters them, spawners, and despawners. As for enemies, I included the fruit fly, the snakehumber, the crawltus, the spider, the egg slime, the forker, the cyclaser, and for the mid-boss I picked the wormion, and for the final boss I picked the power plant. So we still have a lot to talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time for this video. But don't worry, you can watch the rest of this episode right now here on the channel. So come check it out if you want to learn more about creating a concept for a video game level. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.